Advertising, advertising, memorable ads and slogans. This guest has seen the best of them, known in the space like wrestling to Hulk Hogan.
The world of Hollywood and movies and rights is a very complicated thing, but I'd found this guy who had the rights to the Indiana Jones stuff. We'd paid him a fee to use the hat and the whip, and we made the ad. The ad was good, the client liked the ad. We'd booked all the air date. And I get a call from this slightly shady guy who sold me the rights to say, yeah, there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. We can't sell the rights to the whip. I said, well, hang on a minute, what do you mean? Why didn't you tell us that? Put the phone down, blood draining from my face. I don't know where this came from, but I just said to this young guy that was working on the account, you go to San Francisco, go to Lucasfilms, take the film, sit in reception until you see George Lucas.
Not only Lucasfilms, see the man
see
himself.
George
Lucas.
Lucas. Tell him we've made a mistake, beg his forgiveness. And this guy, he looked at me and said, are you mad? About 4 days later, I get a phone call. He said, yeah, I've seen George.
Wow.
It's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, we did it. And then we didn't win a client for 3 months. It was just terrible. We got great headlines. We got a terrific office in Soho Square. And we sort of waited for the business world. It didn't roll in. At first, we just thought, well, we're going to win something soon. And 3 months doesn't sound long now. But 3 months, when you're going in every day and you haven't got any clients, it's an incredibly long time. A lot of the clients we were talking to were younger than us. And they were saying, we're not sure you're going to be able to spend time on it. We'd positioned ourselves as being sort of slightly out of reach.
I guess it's the equivalent of like if 3 car CEOs start a quick fit and people bring in their car and go, well, you guys aren't going to get your hands dirty.
That's quite an exaggeration, but yeah, you're on the right track. And literally the guy in Private Eye's office said, oh, are you from that ad agency that doesn't have any clients?
Oh,
so
wow.
It was like all around Soho that we didn't have any business. In the end, it all turned out well. And
it was one of the most profitable
agencies.
agencies.
We became very successful. In about 6 or 7 years, we were 17th or 18th biggest agency in London.
And what did you sell it for?
I just told you 9 times that. It's never been reported.
Oh, can we get an exclusive?
No.
Can you share how much you personally made?
No, I can't. We were very happy.
The IPA gives you a call and goes, Paul, we want you to come over.
It's exactly what happened. It didn't quite happen like that in the sense that they need to go through a proper process, and they formed a committee to try and identify someone that would be appropriate. I got a call from one of the people on the committee who had worked at Saatchi's with me years ago. He said, do you know we're looking for someone to run the IPA? Oh yeah, I had read something in campaign. He said, why don't you do it? And I said, well, really? The more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, actually, I quite like that idea.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good. Are we done?
We're
Can
done.
I go? I feel like I've been in analysis. And yeah, that was an epic. Hi, I'm Paul Bainsfair, and this is how I became the Director General of the IPA.
Advertising, advertising, memorable ads and slogans. This guest has seen the best of them, known in the space like wrestling to Hulk Hogan. From labour jives to pregnant men and many things in between, he began his studies in the 17s while still within his teens. From strength to strength and triumph to triumph, he's been a part of agencies that were leading, with stories of the wilder days where pushing boundaries was succeeding. Now we have but a few short hours to get some of his story laid bare. We're on set with advertising legend, Director General of the IPA, Paul Bainsfair.
Oh, I need a copy of that.
Sure.
Very good.
So that's your story that we're going to unpack.
Well, you've done it. It's
today.
just read the poem. Yeah.
There we go. Right, well, let's wrap up for the day. We want to hear your version of it and your insights and the stories along the way. It's a fascinating story. You were CEO of one of the most successful, well-known agencies, advertising agencies ever, Saatchi Saatchi, and was CEO at a big time for them. You were at the company when they were buying up agencies in a way I don't think has ever been done since, often for hundreds of millions of pounds. Multiple agencies being bought in just 1 year sometimes. And then stepping up to a CEO role. First launching your own company, then stepping up to a CEO role for Europe, chairman role for Iris for a global role, and now obviously Director General at the IPA. Quite a journey. So let's unpack, how did you become Director General of the IPA? And we'll take it back to the beginning. Please paint a picture of how life began for you.
Well, I mean, do you mean my career or my life?
No, life.
Yeah, life. Yeah.
So I'll try and make it relevant to my career, because otherwise it's just a story of a happy childhood. But I did have this sort of important moment, I think, when I was about 14, when my father sat me down and said, what are you going to do, when you go into the world of work? Which I found quite surprising, because I still, felt like a child,
You're
but
14, you're still young, playing out in the street.
I mean, I think, obviously this was slightly probably coming from a place where I think he started work at 14,
Wow.
he, as many people did in the 1940s and early 50s.
And he was a builder?
He was originally a cabinet maker. He was he was an apprentice cabinet maker. He became a cabinet maker, and then he ended up, through circumstance, running and owning a small building firm.
Right.
And so his world was very much a world of, building contractors, architects, surveyors, all the things that go along with that side of things. And, from his point of view, he thought, well, that's the world I know. That's therefore the world I'm sure my son will probably want to be part of. And, and I'd already started then doing a bit of Saturday work for his firm, and, working on building sites. And then I quickly persuaded him I should work in the office, which is a much better idea.
So did you see at that point, you think this could be a career for me, or thought,
well, obviously, I think we all know more about the things that we're exposed to, and therefore, when when you're asked that question, I suppose just look around, look at your friends. A lot of people will go into related fields that their parents worked in. I mean, it's just the way things are. But a funny thing happened to me when he said that and said, what do you want to do? And he said, and he said something like, what about architecture or surveying, because, you're quite good at school, you could do something like that, which in his world, that was an aspirational job that you could aim for. And literally the moment he said that, without ever having thought about it before, I realized that I didn't want to do that.
Did you know what you did want to do?
Well, this was the thing. He said exactly that. He said, well, when I said, well, I don't think I want to do that. He said, well, what are you going to do? And I'm sure it didn't quite happen like this, but in my memory, I think very quickly I said, well, I quite like. He may have said something. What are you interested in? What if you're not going to do something I know about? What do you know about? You're only a kid. What do you want to do? And I somewhere along the line, I said something about advertising, and I don't know where it came from, other than I had grown up like a lot of kids of my age, when there was literally only one commercial TV channel. There were only two channels when I was a kid. It was BBC or ITV, and basically, ITV was full of ads, and therefore all the kids knew all the ads, and we all sang all the jingles in the playground, or we all had our favorite ads. It was
what sticks out? What was your favorite ad at the time?
Oh, I think when I was very young, jingles were the big thing, so there were ads for, there was a sweet called Murray Mints, a mint.
Ah, yes, Murray Mints.
And they had a slogan, Murray Mints, too good to hurry mints. That was their thing. And there was SO Blue, which was a paraffin. People still had paraffin heaters in their homes. And SO Blue was the fuel you used to light these house heaters. And they used to have this jingle, SO Blue, and the guy would sing blue, blue, blue. It was a very catchy thing. And so all these jingles were just coming at you, and the weight of these ads was enormous. I mean, you were exposed to far more, you have more opportunities to see ads than you ever do today.
Right.
So advertising was very much imprinted on the sort of social kind of life that you led, particularly as a kid.
So when the ads would come, you wouldn't go and make something or switch it
off. Quite the reverse. You'd watch the ads because...
would you look forward to seeing them?
Yes, because there was also a kind of window on a glamorous world, because, I've mentioned some very humdrum brands, but there were ads for things like Martini, and you saw people on yachts, drinking glass in the sun, and there were beautiful girls and good-looking blokes, and you thought, blimey, I didn't even know. I mean, what is this? It
Whole
was
new
like
world.
Hollywood, you know,
Yeah.
this world of glamour and also just mystery. So there was a sort of glamorous side to advertising that was also very appealing. So I think all these things, you know, made me think at the moment. And I recognise this is quite a weird thing to do. But I remember thinking, there must be people there must be jobs there. It just doesn't happen. How does this stuff get to be on TV? So I remember being intrigued by that at quite an early age. So I think somewhere along the line, this came out in the conversation with my father.
Yeah.
And he was horrified. You know, he said, well, advertising. I mean, A, he knew nothing about it. And B, said, it's incredibly cutthroat and they're not very nice people. There was this image of advertising.
He
people.
already knew. Okay.
Yeah, so he has an idea
they
of
were
it.
seen as, you know, cutthroat, very sort of, you know, all about the money, not very, you know, not a kind of what you might call a sensible choice for a career, and also very lacking in security. You know, that there was this feeling that it was a hire and fire business. So he was very anti me thinking about that as a career, which of course made me more interested.
Naturally,
I was at that age where whatever your parents say, you know, you do the opposite. That was the beginning of my interest in advertising, and strangely, I started to find out more about this world. It wasn't a craze with me. It's sort of stuck with me, because the next sort of thing happened in the next year or two. Then these career advice would happen at school, you know, and people would start to say, you know, what do you want to do? Do you want to speak to the careers master? You know, because they try to help you, point you in the right direction. And I already had this sort of pat answer, was, yeah, I want to work in advertising. And I'm like, what? No one's ever said that. You know, it's just because it's such a marginal business. You know, it's not. It's just
not a policeman. It's not a lawyer.
No,
it's not
one of the classic professions. And
yeah.
of course, the careers people knew nothing about advertising.
And you're about 14, 15.
Well,
at this
I'm
age.
now adding a year or two. So now I'm sort of
16.
doing my O levels. I'm
Okay.
now about 16.
Yeah.
And then I had a really lucky break, because I discovered that my parents had moved out of London. We were living in Bushey near Watford.
Yeah.
And Watford College had a famous advertising course. And now again, I'm going back a long time, and you couldn't study advertising in university, or, you know, it was just not a career that had all the stuff around it like it has today. So I thought, well, this is it. I'll get on this course. And kids came from all over the country to go on this course, and they only took about 35 a year. But they always tried to take a few kids from the area.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think I got in on that sort of slightly helpful basis, because I mean, I don't know why. Maybe it was something to do with the council and the grants you got and everything else, but they had to be seen to be helping the local community. You know? So I went along and was interviewed, and I managed to get onto the Watford advertising course, which is very well
How did you feel at the time? You're like, this is great. Or my dream is coming real.
You know, when you're young, you just think, well, I want to do that, so that's what I'll do. You know, and then you get it, and you think, well, that you didn't realize it was quite hard to do it. You just did it, you know. And then I was off, you know, and the more I discovered about the world, the more I became attracted to it. And from there, I managed to, you know, get myself. My very first job wasn't with Saatchi Saatchi; it was with J. Wood Thompson. And
how was that experience? Do you remember anything?
Yeah, it was that was an eye opener.
If you have goals and ambitions within your personal life, career, or business, and would like to overcome the challenges that you face, inspire people, and get to your goals faster, then a coach might be the right solution for you. Go to weunify.co.uk/coach. Now back to the show.
In that they then had offices in Berkeley Square, and they were, it was like the Eton of advertising.
Yeah.
So context, Berkeley Square is probably one of the most expensive piece of real estate for office in London.
God, yeah. I mean,
Mayfair, part of Mayfair.
It was everything in my mind's eye advertising was. It was incredibly glossy. It was like working, you know, for Vogue magazine, only it was advertising, you know, and everybody there wore the right clothes. It looked right. A lot of people came from very moneyed backgrounds. You know, they used to joke that if your if your parents could afford it, they would send you to J. Walter Thompson. You know, it was like that.
Oh wow.
That kind of joke. And I managed to get in. Again, just a fluky thing. Got in.
How?
Well, just I think someone. Actually, my dad came in here because I think he'd done some work for a director of J. Walter Thompson.
Some building work.
Yes, and around about the same time, and had mentioned I was interested, and he'd put me onto their recruitment people. And
oh, brilliant!
You know, and again, lucky bounce, got in.
Look at
got
that.
a job there.
So originally, him not wanting you to go into that industry, he is actually a catalyst in you entering.
Yes,
that
and hilariously, later when I was working at Saatchi's, and Saatchi's has become a household name. I remember going to a sort of party at a guy that he did a lot of work for, very rich guy, and he was like, "Oh, you must meet my son. He works for Saatchi Saatchi." You know, this was the guy who'd said, "No, never go into advertising." You know, so that was funny. So yeah, I got into J. Walter Thompson, and it was great. Except I realised that I didn't. You know, I'm going back to something I said earlier about don't worry if you don't look like the people that are running the company. I didn't look like the people that were running the company.
How were you dressed?
Well, I mean, I had cheap suit on, you know, because I didn't have any money. But they were all wearing Savile Row suits. They were all pretty much exclusively public school children. I mean, I never went to public school. A lot of them were at Oxbridge. You know, it was a very rarefied sort of atmosphere around the senior people. And I remember thinking, this is going to be hard for me to, you know, succeed here. I mean, I was doing all right. I was getting all the right feedback.
Yeah.
And I was very much at the bottom of the pyramid.
What was the job title when you started?
I think I was like a traffic, or I think it's called controllers. So you'd work for the account people, but you rarely saw the client. You were like the people that made everything work through the system of the agency. You were just there to make, like project managers, really.
Yeah.
And then the idea was you would step up to be an account manager or a rep, they used to call them at J. Walter Thompson. And also the other thing that was slightly odd about it was that the world had changed a lot. So this was a brief social history lesson. But in the late 60s, and I mean, this was in the 70s, the early mid 70s, that kind of world where the entitled few ran everything was beginning to break down, you know, and working class people were making films. People like David Bailey were the most well-known photographers in fashion photography. So suddenly it was very much like Twiggy was the thing, you know, and she was a working class girl. She wasn't from the pages of Vogue. You know, all these things were happening at the same time. So the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, everything was had changed. So
were you aware of this at the time?
Yeah, right? Yes, it was how I grew up with all this happening.
I see.
So to go to a place like J. Walter Thompson where it hadn't seemed to have happened, you know, where things were still, as I say, very much run by the entitled few. And they were good. I'm not saying they weren't good at their job, but it was very much the old boy network.
Yeah.
Or the old school tie, call it what you will. And it just sort of jarred with my outlook. So it was from there that I went and got a job at Saatchi's, which was the embodiment of what I'm talking about. This was a completely different world. This was the agency that was on the up, that was breaking all the rules, anti-establishment. You know, it was really an audacious play. You know, this agency already, for a start, it had a weird name. You know, it just sounded and looked different. And I got a job there because I knew a mate of mine who had worked with me at JWC, got a job there, and we used to meet for a beer, and he said, "You've got to come here. You've got to get a job."
What would he tell you about it?
He just said, you won't believe it. You know, it's every man for themselves. It's just, it's like the Wild West, but it's just exciting, you know, and they were winning lots of business. They were still quite small.
And what did you think? This sounds great.
It sounds fantastic. And obviously I'd read about them in the pages of Campaign because they were getting more and more headlines.
What were paint the picture of the time? What were the headlines? What were they famous for at that time?
First of all, they were famous because they were the first agency that realized you could manipulate campaign, and that you could create publicity for yourself.
Yeah.
So
for those who don't know, campaign is the industry press.
Yeah, campaigns was the Bible for the advertising world. And it wasn't until Saatchi's came along, everyone does it now. They realized they would take the journalists out, lavish sort of meals and drinks on them. They would take them to parties. They would send gossip to the journalists about other agencies that they would print. They would get under their skin. They would become, they were just brilliant at PR. And of course, when they had a story themselves, they would inflate the size of the win, and they would.
They'd say that it was more budget,
bigger than it was, and they would just create this. They would create the sense that Saatchi's was just this unstoppable force.
I heard this story about. Do you know about making the place seem like they've got more people working for them than they actually had?
Yeah,
what was that?
Well, they had three in their very early days. They had 3 locations, not at the same time. They went from one to the other. They started at Golden Square, and this is when they were really just starting. And they Golden Square in Soho.
Yeah.
Finally, I mean, M&C Saatchi, the final iteration of Saatchi and Saatchi, they've gone back to Golden Square. They are in Golden Square, but they started there. Then when they outgrew that, they got an office. They had this when I joined them. They had an office in Lower Regent Street,
right,
which is just down from Piccadilly Circus.
Yeah,
and they had taken on the office. It had previously been the showroom for Cunard, the cruise company. The big steamship company. And they had this big window. It's like like a car showroom, incredibly showy sort of front, because it was a showroom. And some tiny offices behind the reception, which was the showroom.
Yeah.
And they used this blatantly to create the impression that it was a massive company, because no one knew they only had a few offices out the back. They had this massive reception, big glass frontage. And, any client coming in would think this is like the most successful company in the world.
Yeah.
But in truth, the whole thing was for show.
Yeah.
And they had, everyone was working in cramped conditions round the back. But when they did have a big pitch, because it was still a small agency, they would get people, pay kids to come and sit in reception and literally make the place look like it was busy, busier than it was.
So they would just pay people just to come in and make it look busy. They weren't actually had a job there.
Exactly. Just sit there, read the newspaper. So clients would come in and get the sense. This was, we laugh about it, but it was just a brilliant strategy.
Genius.
Because,
genius.
It created this feeling of confidence and excitement in the eyes of the clients. And, that allied to all the publicity that they were getting just created a feeling that, this was a place on the move, and I want my business to be part of it. So, so when I arrived, a lot of these things had happened before I got there. It had created this sort of sense of energy and excitement and lack of formality that had been the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm going to show an image now to people watching. This I'm sure you'll recognize. So this had happened just before you...
Just before I arrived. That was
one
of the first famous ads that Saatchi's did. And, first of all, it's a great ad. Even today, all these years later, we look at it and we say, why don't we see ads like that anymore? It's a fantastic ad.
I mentioned it to my dad yesterday, and he could say the line, not having seen it for all these years.
Really? Did he work in advertising?
No, he's an architect, but
amazing.
The impact that has.
But the thing is, and this happened again with the famous Labour Isn't Working post that they ran for the Conservatives in the late 1970s. That ad didn't run in many places. It was in surgeries, in national health surgeries. There were a few posters bought.
Let me just describe for anybody just listening. We have a photo here of a man that's pregnant, and the line underneath says, so a large belly, would you be more careful if it was you that got pregnant? Contraception is one of the facts of life. So who was the client?
Well, it was the government. It was the Health Education Authority, and the who used to buy great ads, by the way. I mean, lots of great ads the government bought over the years. But the point I just was trying to make was that they realised it was a great ad. They realised not many. If they just put it out there, not many. They might win a few awards, but not many people would actually see it. So they just PR'd the hell out of it, and used it in every possible way to get attention, to get radio and TV coverage. Because of course it is it's still a startling image, but if you go back to the 1970s, that was a daring image. The idea of showing a man in a state of pregnancy was just hadn't been seen before. It was just, just sort of messed your head up.
It does. Yeah.
So
we've got another ad here that's famous. This was while you were there, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Another one here. Show that to your camera.
This is Labour Isn't Working.
But just describe the ad for anybody listening.
So this is a long queue outside the unemployment office with the headline, Labour Isn't Working. Labour were in government. It was an ad for the Conservatives, and this ad has been reproduced so many times. And not only that, I'll come on to that in a moment, but not only that, the Labour Party and their advisors made the absolutely fundamental error, because when it came out, all the newspapers ran the ad. I mean, it was not in space. They just ran the
wow.
So it's free advertising. Ad went up because again they PR'd it.
Yeah.
So they weren't
no one
had
PR'd political ads before.
Right.
So yeah, you go on. You're going to ask.
Nobody. They weren't having to pay to get the ad out, and press just wanted to post this.
And like the Pregnant Man, there weren't that many poster sites which had that poster on, but all the newspapers carried the ad. And the reason they carried the ad was because, and I was about to say this, the Labour Party made a mistake of saying this isn't fair. They shouldn't have said, they shouldn't do this because they've used, and they started going down the rabbit hole of saying that the people in the queue in the ad are actors. It's like, and everyone was saying, yeah, but it's an ad.
Of course.
Yeah, it's an ad,
but that's not right. And of course, the more they chunted on about it, the more the papers ran the story, and it just grew and grew and grew.
What year is this? This is,
I think, 78 or 79. Yeah.
And so do you remember, what role were you in at the time at Saatchi, and what was your feeling about all this hype at this company you're at?
Well, first of all, I must say, I wasn't working on the Conservative Party campaign. And although we were all very excited about it in the agency.
Do you remember the first time you saw it?
Yes. And I might say that there was a lot of secrecy around the development of the ads. So all the ads were being developed off-site because they were terrified that there'd be leaks and that it would get out what the plans were.
So they weren't doing it in the office.
No,
it's been done.
But everyone who was working in it were members. I mean, we didn't draft in extra people to work on it. They were people that were just seconded from the main agency. And the interesting thing is, and I know this to be true, that it didn't matter amongst the creative people in the agency whether they were left or right wing or whether they were Labour supporters or Conservative. They all wanted to work on it,
right?
Because they could. And again, it's difficult for us to appreciate now because we've had years and years of political campaigns that have been, fueled by advertising.
Yeah.
But in those days, to do really good ads for political parties, whatever your politics, it's a great ad. It hadn't been done. They were like the ad versions of political party broadcasts. You know how dreary they are. So to do these ads, people were fighting each other to try and get onto the account, and it was very exciting. We usually saw the ads just before they came out, but of course it created a sense of pride because everyone was talking about it, and all your clients. I mean, I was working on mostly packaged goods and beer business at the time, but all my clients wanted to know about how the ads were being written, who was writing them. It was just a topic that was very current, and everyone wanted to join in and talk about.
And so, just going back to this, Labour Isn't Working. Tim Bell was someone who had a big influence on yourself. Is that right? And explain his role in the ad and relationship with Margaret Thatcher.
I've never met anyone as charismatic as Tim Bell. He was I think he was the managing director of the agency. Now, at that point in the late 70s, the agency started to buy other companies, but essentially it was Charlotte Street, the agency in Charlotte Street. And he often described himself as the ampersand, that's the little ands thing between Saatchi and Saatchi.
Right.
So he was very much, an integral part of what made the brothers successful, because he would be able to go into any room with any client, the odd exception, but he would literally have the meeting out of his hand in no time at all, because he just had this incredibly, charisma is an overused word. He literally, it was an electrifying presence in any room. And he was funny. He was, he had a Ferrari. He used to smoke, chain smoke. He had sort of long hair, and he was just the latest gear on. He just was like a pop star.
And so when you saw him, what did you think at that stage of your career?
Oh, I just adored him. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to try and copy his mannerisms.
Do you want a Ferrari?
I wanted a Ferrari, but most of all, he was our leader. And you were excited that he was our leader, because he didn't seem like a normal person. He seemed like he had superpowers, and that in turn it all rubs off on you. You start thinking there's something special going on here.
So what was his relationship with Margaret Thatcher?
Well, he did to her what he did to everyone. She absolutely loved him. She was, I think, he would flirt with her. He was a good-looking man. He was very well connected. And he wasn't in any way. How can I put it? He didn't change his personality around her. He just was himself. And I think that she was used to people being intimidated by her presence. He was the opposite, and he didn't. He absolutely loved her. By the way, you can read any of the books he's written about his relationship with her. But he still would say to her, no, I don't think you should do that. I think we should do this. And she adored him. And of course, then when these ads started coming out, she knew nothing about advertising. Quite often she would say, well, I'm not sure we should do that. And he would say, no, it'll be fine. And then she saw the effect of the ads, and that just reinforced the feeling she had towards him and allowed the relationship to grow.
What would he advise her on? Was it about her? Read about her clothes.
Well, there was another guru-like guy called Gordon Rees, who had, in fact, got Saatchi's involved, who was a PR man.
Right.
Another flash suit, cigar smoking, sort of charismatic guy, and he was very much on the teaching how to speak, how you should dress, and all that kind of thing. But very quickly, as Tim became part of that little triumvirate, I think they would just spend hours talking about the presentation of her leadership. And I'm sure that, I wasn't in the room, so I can't say, but I'm sure that his advice went beyond just advertising.
Yeah. Fascinating. So where are we on Paul's career, Ash?
Yeah, so you're in Saatchi now, you're seeing these leaders and you're seeing how their leadership styles are affecting rooms. How does your ascent upwards of the chain go within Saatchi?
Well, I think, obviously there are a number of things that conspire to make anybody's career turn out the way it does. But luck is incredibly important. So, I was lucky in that I was around at the right time, as we've already said. And also, you need little victory. You're like a little general in the army. So you need victories. And, I wasn't the only one, because we were winning lots of business, but I was fronting new business, and we were winning that. So it was beginning to look good, if you like, and I was enjoying myself, and it was all going well. And I think the thing that really made me feel I should aim high, because I don't think, go back to the early part of this conversation, I was just glad to be in advertising. I was just feeling pleased I'd washed up inside a big successful advertising agency. So the moment when I started to think, well, I actually could push on here is when you get good feedback from other senior people. So I started to get, initially it was a feeling, and then it was crystallized in some conversations.
What would people say?
They were very clever at creating a kind of informal inner sanctum. So within what was then a very big and growing company with hundreds of employees, they were able to take people to one side, and I was one of them, and say, "You're in the gang," sort of thing. These weren't necessarily the words they used, but the impression was very much, you are a chosen one. Not
How
the
did that
only
make
one.
you feel?
Like 10 foot tall, obviously.
It's interesting you say that, because Sam Hawkey, who was CEO at Saatchi, shared with us that he was told midway through his career there that you're going to be the future CEO of Saatchi. And he would get introduced sometimes as this is the future CEO of Saatchi.
Well, I didn't know they were still doing it, but there you are. But I mean, it didn't go as far as that in my case. It wasn't something that was ever spoken out loud, but there was this sort of definite sense of you were in this sort of special inner sanctum, and that made you feel incredibly confident about your place in the company, but also it built ambitious feelings within yourself.
Are you an agency or brand that would like to work with our production company, Unity and Motion? If so, contact us at unityandmotion.com. We produce commercials and social content for brands such as Chanel, Amazon, Reebok, Harrods, The Ritz, and many more. Now back to the show.
So people can learn from your experience, what was it, do you think, about you or what you did that got you into that position? What can others learn from that?
Well, I think first of all, you've got to put it in context, which was the kind of company Saatchi's was. And it was very much a company where, I mean, they later sort of came up with this expression, didn't they? Nothing is impossible. That became their mantra.
Yeah.
That hadn't been developed in a formal sense when I was there. But that was very much what it was about. And if you were seen as someone who would, without hesitation, put your hand up to do something, whether it was difficult, big, challenging, but you was like, I'll do that. And I was one of those. I think that added to the sense that you were one of them. This feeling, because they'd come from nowhere and they'd built this thing that was, knocking everything out of the way.
Tell us about them, about the brothers.
The other story, the other part of the story is that they were very different brothers.
So this is Charles and Morris.
I mean, there were other Saatchi brothers, but they weren't in the business.
Okay. So they decided to start an agency together and just do things in a destructive
Charlie
way.
was the older brother, and he was a creative man, and he had worked in some agencies, I think Benton and Bowles and others, and he was, well, I talk about charismatic people. He was a brooding but incredibly powerful personality who was quite shy in many ways. He, as the company grew, he and Morris had offices on the 6th floor, and they would come in the morning and they would go up to 6th floor. And if you had to see them, you'd go up there. They wouldn't walk around the building. That was Tim's job, and they would be on the top floor. And he would spend a lot of time with Jeremy Sinclair, who was the creative director, and they'd be endlessly talking about the creative work. And he was obsessed with the creative work, but he was also obsessed with bigness. And he knew that he used to have this saying, like, number one is wonderful, and
was their goal to be the biggest agency in the world?
Well, I think eventually it was their goal, but I don't think they realized that was on the table when they started. It was to be the biggest in the UK, certainly from an early stage. And there used to be a much more, it was much more of a currency how big an agency was then. So now you only get it sort of once a year, you get the tables, but there was this thing called Media Expenditure Analysis Limited, MEAL it was called, and it was a book that you could look into and see how much every client spent that year. So you could,
all of the agencies.
Yeah, so you could add up how much agencies. And J. Thompson were the biggest. And when I went to Saatchi's, they were, if they were in the top 20, I'd be surprised. But very quickly, we'd got to the position where we were vying with J. Thompson to be the biggest, and it became an obsession with Charlie. So that was Charlie's thing. And Morris, who was his younger brother, was the more sort of intellectual of the two. He'd gone to the LSE, got first class degree, you know, and basically Charlie got him into the business. You know, even he didn't really have any other job. He just came straight into the business, and he was going to be the business brain behind this push for glory. But Morris was also incredibly, unlike Charlie, who was slightly scary. He was like a mafia boss. Morris had this slightly bespectacled, charming persona, and he was very clever and very erudite, and he could talk clients, you know, into anything as well.
So would you be interacting with them? At what point did you
Yeah,
start
not every day, because but what, you know, this juggernaut happened very quickly. So the other person that was very critical was Martin Sorrell, who became the boss of WPP, or the founder of it, and now doing his other thing.
And WPP, again, those who don't know, almost probably 15 billion.
Yeah, it's one of the big 5 advertising networks today in the world. So, but he's moved on. But he was a sort of graduate of Harvard Business School, although he was a Londoner, and he was the business brains. He was the guy that put together.
Sorrell was.
Yeah. This plan to be acquisitive and take over the advertising industry effectively. But to go back to the brothers, you had this odd sort of opposites attracting thing, where Morris was very intellectual, very considered, and Charlie was this sort of brooding, scary, you know, but at the same time incredibly powerful in an attractive way personality. Yeah. So it was and then you had Tim, this charismatic guy, you know. So then you got Martin, this brainy bloke, you know, developed. So it was an incredible cocktail. So if you say to me, did you spend a lot of time with them? No, because they were in this sort of cabal at the top plotting the takeover of the world, you know, and we were out there just winning business and writing ads. So, you know, yes, you came into contact with them, but it was very often. So the other great thing about Charles was, if you weren't in that inner sort of cabal, you know, the people that were really running it, when you got shouted at a lot or thrown around the room by Charlie, if you weren't in that, but you were one of the managers, he treated you like you were one of his children. He loved you, you know. He was like always giving you encouragement, and that made you feel, again, really good, really good. So it was a very interesting dynamic.
I want to get on to like how you became CEO of this amazing agency in this period, but before then, what are some moments where, as everybody does, we make mistakes?
I had glorious failures, and we were working on Schweppes, so a big advertiser at the time, and we'd come up with...
How much would they spend on adverts?
Oh, I mean, to make an ad, they'd happily spend £250,000, you know, and this was a long time ago. So they were spending millions on their brand. Sadly, they stopped doing that classic mistake, you know, when they owned the market. They were the only brand, it was supermarket brands or Schweppes, and then they thought, oh,
we don't need to.
And then what happened? Fever Tree came along and positioned themselves as a premium to Schweppes. And they left it too late, and they were like gasping in the middle ground, and you know, their brand is now nothing like it was. But in those days, it was a big brand.
Yeah,
and they had an advertising line, which anybody over 50 will remember, which was "Shh, you know who," "Shh" being the 3 letters that start Schweppes, and it was a sort of, there was a mnemonic that the cat would be released, "Shh, you know who," and it was a very big campaign. And we had come up with an iteration of this, which was a series of ads where you saw famous people but you can quite see them, but you thought, oh, that's Indiana Jones. And the little payoff was there'd be a bottle of Schweppes that someone would open it. Oh no, you know who? It was a sort of double sort of bluff thing. It was quite sweet. It wasn't the best advertising in the world, but it was all right. And we got this ad through the client featuring Indiana Jones, and it was a sort of, he ran around a campfire, and his Stetson was there, and his bullwhip, you know, which was his famous thing.
Yeah.
And we wrote this ad, and I found this guy in London. You know, the world of Hollywood and movies and rights is a very complicated thing. But I'd found this guy who had the rights to the Indiana Jones stuff.
Yeah.
And we'd paid him a fee to use the hat and the whip. And we made the ad, and the ad was good. The client liked the ad. And we were about 3 or 4 weeks ahead of the air date. We'd booked all the air dates. So we had TV booked to go on everywhere.
You shot the film. That was
made. The film was made. It looked good.
Yeah.
Client was happy. And I get a call from this slightly shady guy who sold me the rights to say, yeah, there's been a bit of a misunderstanding, and because we'd sent the film over to him, I think, so he could see it. The hat is fine. We've got, the hat. And I said, what are you trying to say? He said, well, the whip. The whip. We don't have we can't sell the rights to the whip. It's like,
you can't have Indiana Jones without a whip.
Exactly. So I said, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean? Why didn't you tell us that? You knew what the ad was. You saw the storyboard. He said, well, no, I was a bit confused. The guy was hopeless, but there wasn't much in the way of, help, because I now realized I had an ad with one of these emblems of Indiana Jones, and I didn't have the rights for it, or we didn't have, and the client didn't have. So I was literally, I put the phone down, blood draining from my face, because we've spent £250,000 on the ad. I've just been told that we don't have the rights to show the whip. We can't get it out of the ad. It's in the ad. It's an integral part of the ad.
Yeah.
And no chance in hell of getting the rights. And we've got millions of pounds booked on air.
How are you feeling at this point?
I felt like death, literally. And I put the phone down, and I thought to myself, this is the end of my career. I am going to have to go and tell my bosses what's happened. So eventually I went to the loo, obviously. And then I went over to see these guys, Roy Woolman and Terry Bannister, who had taken over from Tim Bell, who were the next in line.
Yeah.
Great guys. I walked into their office. I think they were playing football in their office. They used to share an office. They would join CEOs. And they said, you're all right, boy. You look a bit sad, So I said, I've got something terrible's happened. So I told them the story. And they didn't even stop playing football, And I think Terry said, oh, you'll think of something, And it carried on.
Perfect advice.
Carried on playing football.
And I walked out of the room, and I was like, I had this sort of, well, on the one hand, I've not been sacked. That's good.
That's good.
On the other hand, they think I'm going to think of something. That's bad. I'm not. I've thought of everything I can think of. I haven't got any answers.
That's why you came to them for
yeah.
an answer.
So, but brilliant example of management, really, because it would have been so easy for them to, just turn on me and, just wallow in the problem. So I went back to my office. I don't know where this came from, but I just said to this young guy that was working on the account with me, the account exec, Dylan, come in here. So Dylan came here. I said, this problem with because now it's all around the building. Everyone knows there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
This problem with the Indiana Jones film. He said, yeah, it's terrible. I said, yeah, well, look, here's the thing. I think that the only way is if we go to Los Angeles, show the film to Lucasfilms, who've got all the rights. I mean, they're the fountainhead of all the rights.
Mm-hmm.
They made the film. Get them to give us the approval. And this guy, he looked at me and said, are you mad? I said, what do you mean? He said, how on earth are we going to get Luke? I mean, we've got no time. They're not going to see it. I was like, it's not going to work.
So you told him to fly all the way to LA.
I said, look, it will work. I said, go on a plane to San Francisco, go to Lucasfilms, take the film, sit in reception until you see George Lucas. Tell him what's
Not only
happening.
Lucasfilms, see the man
See
himself.
George
himself.
Tell him we've made a mistake. Beg his forgiveness. Tell him we're in a sticky position. It's good for the Indiana Jones franchise, promoting the thing. Just go. He said, I'll go, but it'll be a waste of time.
And this guy's thinking, I've got to spend the next however many days it takes.
Actually,
to go
I
there
think
and
he
back.
was secretly pleased because he
Well,
thought, I'm going to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'm not paying for it.
Yeah.
Happy days. Yeah.
So off he goes. And meanwhile, we've got 3 or 4 other things we're trying to work on, like, can we edit the film? Then I sort of almost forgot that he'd gone. And about 4 days later, I get a phone call. My PA says, I've got Dylan on the phone. It's Dylan, what's happened? And I'm fully expecting the sob story, you know. He said, yeah, I've seen George.
Wow.
It's fine.
Yeah.
In a few words. What did you think?
No, stop. But tell me more. I want to know more. He said, well, and he was a terribly nice young man and very polite. And he went into the Lucasfilms, which I've subsequently been to. It's an impressive place.
Yeah.
And he eventually gets in to see, because he's just a curiosity. This weird Englishman's arrived, and he's got a film, so I need to show George. So he gets into the outer sort of office of where George is, and he sits there, and the PA keeps saying, I don't think George is going to see you today. He sat there for like 2 days. And eventually, George says, send that guy in, you know. So Dylan comes in, and he's trying to explain. He said, just put the film on. They put the film on. He goes, yeah, it's great. He said, well, can we run it? He said, yeah, you can run it. It's fine. Literally.
Wow.
So we never had anything signed or anything. It was just a kind of on his say-so.
Oh, really? Yeah. There's no signature.
No.
Just
but we had no other choice. So, but yeah, we got away with it. But that was a royal up. And to go back to where we started, which is, you know, on your road, the rocky road to any kind of success you're going to have, there will be sort of problems that you have to just hope, you know, luck or something comes your way to get around.
Ash, what do you think the lesson from that story is?
Ooh, there's a few lessons in that. I think there's a lesson in leadership stands out a lot there in terms of they trusted you to make the right decision, whatever that may be, and they didn't get angry with you. They gave you that space and opportunity to solve it.
So true. Yeah. So
and
true.
You did.
Yeah, and you did solve it.
So, 83 to 86, Saatchi Saatchi bought 29 companies. These were not small purchases, often 100 million plus. And one of those they bought was Ted Bates, which was the third biggest agency in the US. Where were you in these time periods? What was your role and what was going through your mind as this was happening?
Well, I think it was an interesting time because, as I've explained already, I wasn't involved in this acquisition strategy. I was running the advertising agency, or I became the guy that was running the agency. And our job was to keep the mothership on course, keep winning, keep writing great ads. That was our thing. But meanwhile, this thing was going on around us, which was we were the biggest agency in the UK. Then we were the biggest agency after the Ted Bates acquisition. We became the biggest agency.
They achieved their goal.
So they achieved their goal.
The goal was achieved.
And of course, what happened is when you from my point of view, the very practical effect of all this was you take over Ted Bates, they've got big clients. So now Ted Bates is part of Saatchi's, and like Mars, they have Mars, for example. I've got to go now and meet all the Mars clients, and they don't know me from a hole in the ground, and you've got to persuade them that all the people they're used to working with are still going to be on their account, or maybe some of them aren't. So it was a big learning sort of process for us all.
What was your role in this time?
Well, I was at that point. I was one of the. It was before I became the boss of the agency in Charlotte Street. I was then one of the barons, we used to call them. So you had whoever was running it. Often it was two guys.
You'd always have two CEOs.
Yeah, joint, and that happened with me and a guy called John Sharkey. And then underneath you'd have big account groups, and they were like princedoms. Literally there would be a prince or a baron running these big account groups, and I was one of those.
Yeah.
Is this normal? Was this normal in the industry, or a Saatchi thing?
No, it was. It became quite popular for a while. I think it's less so now. But it was a great, when you had a huge agency, it was a great way of keeping things feeling quite manageable, because if you're trying to run something and you're working with different people from different parts of the year. So we would always work with this. So I had a team of account handlers, and we would work on all the business in our group and likewise in the other groups. And so, yeah, that was the way we managed such a big company.
So what was the point? Do you remember hearing that they'd like you to interview or go for the CEO role?
Yeah, so that happened. It was, can't remember exactly, it went towards the end of the 80s. And the two guys I mentioned in the other story, Roy and Terry, were going to be, by now we've got this massive group of companies, because not all the companies were merged into Saatchi's. Some of them continued to run under their own brand names. So they were going to move to the PLC and run the whole group.
Yeah.
So that created a vacuum. So it was there was a lot of chat around who's going to succeed Roy and Terry.
Mm.
And
did you think, I want it to be me?
I think by that point, yes, I definitely wanted to be, the guy or one of the guys.
And it was going to be one of the barons, let's say.
That was it was clear they weren't going to, it was promotion from within, because there was a strong feeling that if you hadn't grown up there, you wouldn't understand the culture. So there were lots, you can imagine there was a sort of febrile atmosphere at the time where everyone was saying, well, it could be him or her, or are they going to do it? And people would come up to you in the pub and say, I hear you're one of the guys, one of the chosen ones, and you're going to, and you just have to play it down. And I think by then I mentioned again earlier this thing about making you feel, they had this way of making you feel you were part of something special within the company.
Yeah.
So I sort of have been told that enough times to think, I really, if I'm not one of them, something's gone wrong here, So yeah, I was given the nod, and off we went.
What do you remember about that? Remember the day? Okay, I'm going to be CEO of this company that I came in at as a young man.
I was excited. It was like winning the lottery. It was just unbelievable. But then, of course, you realise it's a big job. And there's a lot of stress and worry that comes with that. But it was it was a very exciting moment in time. We enjoyed it. It was fun.
What would you say the key difference is from going from like a baron where you were to becoming a CEO, joint CEO? What were the things that you didn't anticipate, and what were the things that you enjoyed about it?
First of all, if you think about it, you're one of the barons. Now you're the boss of the barons. So it's like some sort of Tudor history thing. This, so they're all off.
Yeah,
that's your first.
None of them like you.
No, they might have liked you before, but now
you're their boss.
You're their boss, and some of them think they're better than you. You should be their boss.
Yeah, they should have got it.
Yeah, you don't really know what some of the others think. So you got that's the first thing you've got to deal with, and in some cases you have to be quite brutal, because you look at these guys and you expect it to begin with, but if, say, you're a few months down the line and you're still getting the sense, or you're hearing that they're briefing against you, or they're not kind of, we didn't have much of this, by the way. We had a little bit of it, we didn't have much of it. Then you've got to act. You can't let that fester. So
when you say act, do you mean fire?
Either fire or move them into a role where they're sort of neutered, and they don't have the power. So
did you have to do that?
In one case, yeah.
What did you do? Fire or neuter?
Neuter, yeah.
Okay. Did it work?
Yeah, it was unpleasant, but there. So you have to do that. So that's the first thing. You realise that not everyone's happy as you are to be that you've got this job. And then the next thing is you think you know everything about the company, but when you're running the company, you discover that you don't know everything about the company. And you discover that there are pockets of the agency that you don't understand, or you need to find out more about. Might be parts of the agency making a lot of money that you had dismissed as not being as critical as you were when you were competing with that other part of the agency. And it's quite a rude awakening in many ways when you're given a job like that. We kind of managed to stagger through it.
Grey Matter's new business tip for today: stay true to your values and be prepared to walk away. If the chemistry with a prospect isn't right, or if the minimum budget or type of work doesn't meet your criteria, then don't drag your team into a pitch process. If clients are showing a lack of transparency or unwillingness to collaborate earlier on, then these are the red flags. Grey Matters is a straight-talking business development consultancy that empowers agencies to position, market, and sell themselves for new business success. That's the good thing about it. Sell through, because we heard from the last couple of years of talking to many leaders that there's that mystery about the CEO position and that many of the C-suite positions, that there's no formal training for it. You kind of get dropped into it.
Yeah, that's true. And they're quite lonely roles often, because the other thing that happens when you're in charge is that, and this is one of the downsides of it, I think, especially in an agency, is that people want your help when there are problems. And when everything's going well and there's glory to be had, you don't get invited to the meeting, because they don't need you. Yeah. So if you're not careful, a lot of your day is just firefighting.
So at this stage, you're CEO of one of the biggest agencies in the world, or the biggest agency in the world, and on a great salary, career's going great clients, things are going brilliant, and you make the decision that you're going to leave.
Exactly.
Why?
That's a very good question. I asked myself that. I asked myself that at the time. And of course, it goes back to ambition, I think. So I'm quite a big believer in the idea that, I mean, it might be true for some people who sit down when they're very young and have an ambition to be the president of the United States or the prime minister, or to start a massive new company and be this and be Elon Musk. But for most of us, I think our ambitions, our horizons change, as we, so my first, as I mentioned earlier, my first ambition was I'd get a job in advertising. I was like, I've arrived. Then it's like, oh, hang on a minute, there's a competition here. I now need to get that job in advertising, or I want to be that person. Or so it became, I don't know when, but it became quite clear to me that starting your own agency, I mean, at the end of the day, I'd worked at Saatchi's for most of my career. They had started their agency, and they had made such a success of it. I thought there's a way here to go even further, and that is to be part of a new company and start a new agency. I would say it was just sitting at the back of my mind. And then events conspired. And it started with Dave Trott, who's still quite a well-known commentator on the advertising industry, who writes about advertising. He left in a blaze of sort of publicity. He left the agency he had started called God Green is Trott. And he was out looking for people to start a new agency with.
Okay.
And I mentioned that when I was made the CEO at Saatchi's, it was a joint role.
Yeah.
And my opposite number was a guy called John Sharkey. And he had, after a couple of years, he had left to join one of our clients to be the chief operating officer of a big recruitment company called Blue Arrow.
Blue Arrow, yeah.
And that didn't work out well for various reasons. So he had rejoined a French advertising group who were looking to start an agency in London. And he called me up and said, "You know Dave's on the loose?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why don't we start an agency with him?" So,
what did you think?
Well, Dave had a reputation for being quite difficult, but a great creative guy. So we talked that through. And John then, because he was working for this French group, he said, "I can get them to bankroll the startup because they can't find an agency to buy in London, and I think they would go in for being like the fourth, like a sleeping partner, and they would provide the working capital." So that made it even more attractive because it meant we didn't have to mortgage our houses and kind of put everything on the line. So we met with Dave and met with the French, and these things, they take on a life of their own, and pretty soon it was happening. And
but what can you share? What salary were you on as CEO of Saatchi's at the time? What were you leaving?
It was a lot of money. I can't. You know what?
Roughly,
I can't remember. It was certainly competitive, shall we say? I was running a big agency, and
where we? I'm really fascinated. Where are we talking numbers wise?
I'm too modest to say.
Okay.
But it was a lot of money.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. So
cool.
You've heard the expression "golden handcuffs."
Yes.
I had golden handcuffs on, so to leave that behind and to just go out on your own was a huge leap of faith and into the dark.
What did your family think?
They were great. I mean, they were very supportive, and I think my father was. This happened just after my father died, actually, so he never saw that part of me. But he would having been the man, don't go to. He would then say, "No, don't leave." He would be there. But yeah, so they now my wife and immediate family were all very supportive. So yeah, we did it, and then we didn't win a client for 3 months. It was just terrible.
So you start this company, you've got like 3 heavyweights. Everybody knows who you are in the industry. Yeah. It's like, wow, look at this super team. And then nothing.
We got a lot of meetings. We got great headlines, and we got a terrific office in Soho Square, and we sort of waited for the business to roll in. It didn't roll in. And
are you thinking, oh no, we have made a big
I did.
mistake?
It's exactly what I was thinking, because at first we just thought, well, this is we're gonna win something soon. And 3 months doesn't sound long now, but 3 months when you're going in every day and you haven't got any clients, it's an incredibly long time.
Yes, that must have been excruciating.
And we had a couple of near misses, and then we started to sort of get more analytical about it. So what is going on here? So we interviewed a few of the clients that hadn't given us the business, and none of them hadn't given the business because they didn't think we were good or that we couldn't do it. But we were suffering, and you mentioned it just then, from the problem of being quite well-known sort of heavyweight guys. And a lot of the clients we were talking to were, the marketing directors were younger than us, and they were saying, we're not sure, we're not sure you're going to be able to spend time on it, or you'll listen to me, or, so it basically we'd positioned ourselves as being sort of slightly out of reach. So we quickly hired a bunch of younger guys to be our sort of next layer.
I guess it's the equivalent of like if 3 like car CEOs start a quick fit and people bring in their car and go, well, you guys aren't going to get your hands dirty.
That's quite an exaggeration, but yeah, you're on the right track. So we got some young guys in who we'd worked with before, who were all great. And we got, then something happened, and we won some Mirror newspaper group business.
How did you feel after you getting some actual work?
It was relief, really, at that point. And then we got, again, we started to get regular new, because it was like someone had unlocked the door. Once someone else had gone in, other clients would go, oh, well, maybe there's something going on there.
Yeah.
And we knocked out a couple of good ads, and we got good publicity. So, but it was becoming quite a thing. And I remember we sent a young account person round to the offices of Private Eye, which were very near us, to get some back copies for some campaign we were going to do. And literally the guy in Private Eye's office said, oh, are you from that ad agency that doesn't have any clients?
Oh, so wow.
It was like all around Soho that we didn't have any business.
How embarrassing.
Yeah, it was. But anyway, in the end, it all turned out well. And
it was one of the most profitable agencies.
I mean, we did do very well. We became very successful. And in about 6 or 7 years, I think we were like 100 people. We were about the 17th or 18th biggest agency in London. So it was all going pretty well.
What do you think the lesson from that is, Ash?
Persistence is key, but to also, as you said layers, to know what your clients are looking for, or what they're used to communicating with and working with. They're probably not used to working with CEO level, used to working with more maybe accounts or heads of.
Yeah.
And by reflecting that, it enables things to
be
and
smoother. It's funny you say that, because I think we were guilty of believing our own publicity a bit. We thought, well, people will want to work with us. Whereas in fact, clients are quite conservative. You're right. I think having people they recognise as being more like them, doing the contact stuff, was the right thing to do.
So 98, you sell the company to Omnicom, which is one of the biggest holding companies in the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did you do that? For anybody listening who'd love to sell their company one day, what was critical to that
Well,
happening?
first I should say we were in an unusual situation, which I'll explain. But as a general sort of watchword for this, you have to realize that most of the agencies that are for sale, people don't want to buy. And most of the agencies that are not for sale, people do want to buy. There's a strange inverse thing going on there. And
when did you decide you wanted to sell it?
Well, this is why we're in a different. We were in a very good situation.
Yeah.
But a different situation, because I mentioned that our sleeping partner was a French advertising group. And they were called Boulet Dru depuis Petit. And they were very big.
You wouldn't guess it was French, would you?
Never. I mean, you'd never put that together. And they came to us when we started the agency, and they wanted to help start our agency because they wanted to own our agency. So, in the constitution of the company, when we set it up, we wrote in what's known as a put. And a put is where the company that will ultimately want to buy you agrees up front a formula for the price of the agency. But it's called a put because although you've agreed the formula, it's up to you, the founders, to put the deal on the table. So I can put that deal on the table. We've prearranged, it's going to be a multiple of our profit over the preceding 3 years, and you will pay that price. And they agree that they will pay that price when you put that on the table.
Okay.
So that existed in our constitution. And what had happened in the meantime was that this French group had actually gone into financial trouble. And they had been, they had P&G, a big chunk of P&G business, which they lost in America because they had bought companies elsewhere. And they were acquired by Omnicom.
Okay.
So legally, we were lucky here. The Omnicom, having acquired the French company, were still honor bound to the deal that because they'd bought their
I see.
whole situation.
Okay.
Did they have to buy you when you put the offer on?
Yeah, because it was a put.
So you get to say, here's the deal we agreed.
Yeah, but but we couldn't change the deal. We'd agreed the deal from the outset.
What was the multiple of it? Do you remember the details of the deal?
Yeah, I can more or less remember the details.
Can you tell us?
It was just shy of 10 times the average profit that we had made over the average of 3 years. The last 3 years going up to the purchase point.
Okay.
So the deal was, and we wanted to make the deal because we'd gone through quite a nervous time when the French group got into trouble because we thought, this is not what we signed up for. And also, although the times have changed so much, it sounds almost wrong to confess this, but we had a lot of Philip Morris business. We had the Marlboro cigarette brand, a huge spender, and we knew that the government ban on advertising was coming down the line, and we knew that would hit our profitability for a few years. It would take us a while to. So, partly because my partner John was older than me, and he definitely said I want to, and I was very keen to support what he wanted to do. We were good mates, so we decided that we'd put at this point when we knew we would be able to get a good price for the agency.
Nice. And what did you sell it for?
I just told you 9 times it's never been reported.
Can we get an exclusive?
No. It will remain locked in the secrecy vault.
Can you share how much you personally made from it?
No, I can't. No. We were very happy. Let's put it up.
Yes. Excellent. Okay. It was a good decision after leaving your nice salary at Saatchi's.
It didn't. yes, it all paid off in the end.
Yeah.
But there was a period when I thought it might not.
After BST was acquired, Omnicom merged you guys with TBWA.
Correct.
And then between 1999 and 2009, you took on various senior UK and European facing roles at TBWA. Tell us a bit about that.
So there was a new chapter in my life because having started an agency and owned it, there are certain things that come with that are very seductive. Like you don't have a boss. That's really nice. Even though I love my bosses at Saatchi's, and I'd been at pains to point out how great they were, they're still bosses. So suddenly we had our own thing, and that having your own thing is very hard. Well, you guys are doing it. It's very. The highs are much higher. The lows sometimes are much lower, but it's your thing. So, and when we sold it, we were long enough in the tooth to realize that once you've sold it, you've sold it. But a marvelous thing happened when we sold it to TBWA, and because we were merged not only with TBWA but an agency called Simons Palmer, who had started a few years before we'd started Bainsfair Control and had been very successful as well, and they'd sold to Omnicom. And we were, with our agreement, we were merged with TBWA, the three of us, to form the new TBWA, like New Labour. It was like the new TBWA. And the marvelous thing that happened was we enjoyed, unlike most mergers, we enjoyed a fantastic few years of success. And having sold your company, we suddenly got into this bigger thing that I was still part of them running it effectively, and owned by Omnicom, who are a very benevolent sort of, or at least I thought, very benevolent holding company. And they just kept out of our way because we were just growing like Topsy and winning awards, won Agency of the Year. We were just like on a run. And it was true. I mean, to be honest, when we sold, I think I had in my contract, I had a period I had to agree to continue to work the company for, because obviously they got to bed down your business, your clients. But I stayed way beyond that because I was having a terrific time. Until this success, because this success that we had built a problem, which was that quite a few of the senior people in our agency had the same idea that I'd had, which was, well, look, we're really good at this. We're going to do our own thing, And gradually, the kind of all the successful, driven personalities that had created the growth started to sort of drift off and do their own thing. And I mean, it wasn't terrible. We were still making a lot of money, but the arc went out of the growth. And by then I'd been promoted to run Europe and the whole
so
thing.
That was like 35 offices.
Yeah, and that was, and I wanted to do that because I hadn't done that before, and I thought it would be, interesting for me, and because I've been doing the same thing for a long time at that point. But now I've got the London agency, sort of going through sort of problems because people were going to do their own thing. So people like Johnny Hornby, who started a very successful agency, Trevor Beattie started an agency. So these guys had left, and now I had Omnicom breathing down my neck, basically telling me what to do. And I think had I not had my own agency, that would have been fine, but I just couldn't cope with it. So basically I can't do this. So that was the end of that time for me.
How long did you spend in that role?
I think I want to say 7 or 8 years.
Okay. And how long?
And at that point, so I left, and I thought to myself, I'm quite comfortably off. I actually could do with some time away, to think about what I want to do next. And I then took on a couple of non-exec things, which
was that Iris?
Iris was one of them.
And then Lean Mean Fighting
Machine, who are a very exciting young digital agency, because digital digital had happened at this point. So
Okay.
I wanted to find out more about that. So I worked with them. Was working with Iris, who also had a big digital component, and that was fun. I was quite enjoying that. But then I had a meeting with the guys who were running Iris, who I went to one of these board meetings you go to as a non-exec. And they were like, what are you doing? Why? What else are you doing other than this? I'm doing me and I'm playing golf and I'm having fun. And it's like, no. Why don't you come over here and help us run this? Because we got some issues and we think it'd be great if you could. And I really like them, and so I did that for a few years.
What did you do? What was the job offer?
Was to be chairman of their London agency, and then they had a European aspiration, so I then helped them with some acquisitions in Europe.
So what does a chairman do?
Yeah.
Wow.
If you were to explain it to maybe it's too simple, 5-year-old, what does a chairman do compared to a CEO?
Yeah. Well, I think what does a real chairman do is probably different. It's a different question to the question I'm going to answer, which is what does a chairman in an advertising agency do?
Okay.
And I think let's answer the real chairman role.
Yeah.
Is often the person that the CEO runs the company, but the chairman is the wise old bird who just keeps the CEO honest, keeps a sense of how the other senior people in the company are feeling about the CEO. Is the sort of the conscience of the CEO, and if you like, the representative of the shareholders who's there. If it's a big company, to make sure that everything's being done in the right possible way, and all the rest. It's a sort of wise counsel to the CEO. Often in advertising agency terms, you become a sort of client touchstone. So you're able to have meetings with clients because you're not involved in the day-to-day. You can talk to them about how things are going, and if you sense that they're not happy with something, you can make a correction. So it's more of an advisory sort of role really than an executive role.
You say it's more of like a human bonded role because you're working with how people are perceived. You're kind of advising them on certain things.
And I mean, obviously, also you're keeping an eye on, in the nicest possible way, to make sure they're not abusing their position or they're not taking the company into a direction that you sense would be wrong.
Yeah.
So you're like a check and balance, really. And ultimately, you would have the call on the chief exec as a chairman. You would, if it was going wrong, you would be the one that said this guy or girl is not the right person for the job. Is
it a 9-to-5 job, a chairman, or?
Yeah, normally, because the work expands to fill the time available. So you are, there are lots of things that you can do and you can help with. So yeah, I mean, you're on the same side. So if there's a client that is proving difficult, you might step in and get more involved in management of that business or whatever it might be.
For someone who's planning their career and what they'd like to achieve in their life, who earns more, CEO or chairman?
Normally the CEO would.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, normally the chairman would be at a point in his career where he's probably been a CEO, so he's now moving into that slightly different zone.
Yeah.
Would a chairman usually have something else going on? Like can you do another role?
Yeah, you can do. You can have other interests, but it depends. It depends on the company, on the chairman, on the CEO.
I do have a question about your time at TBWA. So you're in LA and you're in a meeting and Apple is a client and Steve Jobs is in his prime. What do you remember about that experience and what's going through your mind at this board meeting?
Well, it actually wasn't a board meeting. It was a kind of convention. So we had invited all the chief executives and creative directors of all the agencies TBWA owned around the world for a get-together. And it was in Santa Monica. And the LA agency, the TBWA LA agency, was also, it was known as TBWA Chiat Day. Chiat Day had been the agency that had launched Apple and written the 1984 ad that you may have seen.
Yes.
One of the most famous ads ever. And the guy that wrote that ad or was the creative director when that ad was written, was a man called Lee Clow, who's also a legend in the industry, a creative guy. And he was very much still at TBWA in those days, and was a close sort of, I would say, friend almost of Steve Jobs, because to tell the whole story, they had, when Apple launched, they had launched with Chiat Day. Then Steve Jobs left Apple, and it all went tits up, and they'd fired TBWA and they'd gone with other companies. And then when Steve Jobs came back, the first thing he did was he rehired Chiat Day or TBWA, and they wrote some fantastic ads.
And are you working for TBWA during all of this?
Just after he'd come back.
Just after he'd come back.
And we were starting to produce some fantastic ads, and you might remember those early ads for the iPod,
the dancing
ones with the white leads. There was an ad called Think Different, which was
that
all of the great
Einstein and
John Lennon, all the crazy ones. Here's to the crazy ones. They're basically saying they would have used an Apple if they'd have been able to. All fantastic stuff. So Steve Jobs loves the company, and we've got this big convention, this big hotel in LA. And he gives this speech, amazing, like so incredibly motivating. And he talks to the agency gathered from all corners of the world about what it means to be successful and what it means to be Apple, and where his agency. And he's like, you just felt terrific. He was like delivering it, and I get this sort of tap on my shoulder from one of the LA guys saying, look, after this, a few of us are having lunch out on the veranda of the hotel, the Shutters Hotel in Santa Monica, with Steve. And could you?
So you're having lunch with Steve?
Could you join us? Yeah. So it's about 8 of us having lunch with Steve. And I'm so excited because I'm a massive fan. So we go out, we sit around this round table, and then he turns up, and he's horrible.
Why? What makes you say that?
Just the most horrible human being I've ever spent any time with.
Why?
So having just sat through this thing of him being just amazing.
You think he's this? Yeah.
He's rude. He's sort of incredibly. I can only explain it by saying that we were all sitting around with just nice social thing, chatting, and then he would talk. He wouldn't wait for an opening. He would just talk and expect everyone to listen. He literally spoke, then he'd stop speaking, and if me or someone else starts speaking, not interested at all. It was a horrible experience.
Why do you think he?
I think he was slightly autistic. I mean, he clearly he's one of the most impressive people in terms of what he's achieved and how I mean, there have been films made about him since that, and I think some of them tried to portray this slightly odd social awkwardness that he had, and yet at the same time, despite having that, he was able to project this totemic sort of amazing power that everyone just fell for, when he was on the stage.
Do you think he could have achieved what he did if he wasn't the way he was?
No, I don't think so. And I think when you talk about stratospherically successful people, the very few that I've ever been in the company of, they are. You can even relate this to creative. I mean, very, very talented creative people that I've worked with, and I've worked with quite a few. They all have something missing when it comes to what you might call normal social interaction. I'm sure there are people that are exactly like that are not successful, but I do think that allied to other things that you might have, if you are like that driven, tunnel vision, get out of my way because I'm coming through you thing is, I think it's a common denominator.
I guess maybe it's an okay price to pay to have maybe not be so socially, what's the word?
Adapt.
To achieve such great things.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to live like that.
I think it's a tough life if you've got a brain like he does. where it obviously operates very differently to most people, and you're able to think up incredible ideas, have amazing vision constantly. And, we can see it even today. We've got iPhones everywhere, the impact he's had on society. It must be challenging to spend so much time with
mere mortals,
feeling like most people around you are just operating slowly or getting things wrong, and just that must be tough.
It's funny, but I think it went all the way through to the small things in life. Like, I remember shortly after he died, Johnny Ive, who was the British designer who designed all the good-looking stuff that we associate with Apple, who was a close confidant of Steve Jobs. I mean, they went everywhere together. He was telling a story about how they would travel around the world. It was a regular thing on business.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny Ive say they check into a hotel. They always stayed in the best hotels, obviously. They check into a hotel. He'd go to his room, Johnny. He'd put his suitcase on the bed and he'd just sit on the bed and wait for the call he knew was coming, which was Steve Jobs saying, "We're not staying here." Every time they went to a hotel, he would put his in there, "We're not staying here." He was just that relentless search for the perfection in whatever thing he was doing.
Which I think is a great example of that's how he achieved what he did.
Yeah.
Nothing was good enough unless it was exactly how he maybe saw it. And
well, the other great one I think everyone knows is that when he was trying to get the iPhone as small as they could possibly make it, they brought the prototype in, and he said it's still not small enough, and they said we can't make it any smaller, and he dropped it in a glass of water that was on his desk, and bubbles came up. He went, "Go make it smaller."
I guess Saatchi's would say nothing is impossible.
Nothing is impossible.
Let's go back to 1917. The world is in a world war, and the Prime Minister at the time says, "We think advertising can help in this situation."
Correct.
And brings together the advertisers, which is the formation of
The
what
IPA.
is now the IPA.
Yeah, you're quite
What an
right.
origin story.
I mean, you're a keen student of history, clearly.
We do our research.
That's how it got to be formed. Yeah, 1917, World War One. Needs some help with propaganda and general communication. So the government asked all the agencies of the day come together and form an association that we can work with, and that became the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. And that is also why we got such a great building, which is, for anyone who's not been there, a beautiful building in Belgrave Square.
We haven't been. We'd love to go.
Yeah.
Well, come over and see me. Which was gifted to us by the government of the day.
Oh, wow. Back in 1917?
Yeah. Well, when I say gifted, it wasn't strictly speaking gifted. It was a long lease. So
Okay.
it's not technically ours, but we have it for a considerable amount of time still.
Did you have to pay rent on it?
Only no, we don't. We literally pay a peppercorn rent, which is literally nothing. But we have to repair the building, and we have to pay rates, and we have to pay all the usual things. But so it's not. We're not there completely free of charge.
So how does that come about? The IPA gives you a call and goes, "Paul, we want you to come over."
It's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. Only it didn't quite happen like that, in the sense that obviously they need to go through a proper process. And when my predecessor said he was going to retire, it was a very nice man called Hamish Pringle. He gave them a year's notice, so they were able to start looking around, and they formed a committee to try and identify someone that would be appropriate. And all this, I really hadn't given it a second thought. I was quite happy doing what I was doing at Iris, and it had gone sort of. It wasn't on my radar, but I got a call from one of the people on the committee who had worked at Saatchi's with me years ago, and I won't say who it was because I'm not sure this is pucker behaviour. But he said, "Do you know we're looking for someone to run the IPA?" I said, "Oh yeah, I had read something in campaign." He said, "Why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, really? You think I'll be good at that?" I didn't just suddenly it wasn't
on your radar.
It wasn't on my radar. And the more I thought, it was just a thing. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, actually, quite like that idea. and it's the right time for me. And I like the idea of being able to, to have a point of view across the whole industry, put a little bit back, if you like, and started talking some more to them. And then I got invited to have a formal interview, and then I was asked if I would do it. So that was it. It was very straightforward. There was no sort of there was no big story behind it.
11 years in the role now.
Yeah, well, I like it, obviously. And the funny thing is, we celebrated our centenary quite recently. Obviously, think about it.
Yeah.
And when you come to the building, you'll see there's a roll call of all the presidents. So we ask someone in the industry every 2 years, someone who's working in an agency, to be our figurehead, to be our president. And there obviously have been over 50 now, because we've been going for over 100 years. And they're quite a long list of names, you can imagine. And then at the other end of the hallway, there's a shorter list, which is all the director generals. 6. There's only been 6 in 100 years.
Wow.
So there's obviously something about the job people like, because once people get in there, it takes a bit of moving them out. But
why is it director general? Why that title?
It's a sort of, it's almost an antique title. I know why you're asking. It sounds quite old fashioned, but I think its charm lies in its sort of quaintness, and it's sort of because if you were CEO, it sounds very like dynamic. I'm going to get in there and do this and do that. Whereas director general has a much more, it's more ambassadorial sort of role, which it is in a sense, and we're there to advise and help and support the industry, not to tell it what to do. So I think it's a good title.
And in 2017, when you had your centenary, you got a nice message from the Queen.
Yes, we were made we were made into a chartered institute, which is quite remarkable in a way, because we have the royal seal, and it means that ultimately, I mean, we've put this in train. We can properly professionalize the industry of advertising. So, if you're an accountant, you go to a chartered, you become a member of the Chartered Institute of Council. If you're an architect, the Royal Institute of British Art, these are all chartered institutes. And it means that if you can demonstrate that you are a force for good for society, as well as maintaining high professional standards, you can get to the point where, if you take the requisite examinations, you can style yourself, an MIPA after your name, in the same way that you might, put RIBA after your name if you're an architect. So it's helping us to get advertising into a truly professional sort of status, if you like.
So we've got a question that you were asked in 2015, and that question was, "It's 2020. What are you doing?" And you said, "Having a snooze on my driverless car as it belts down the M3.
Yeah.
How close are you to that?
Well, I'm out, aren't I, by a few years? I mean, I think they're coming, driverless cars. I think someone once said, we always overestimate the change in the next 5 years, which is clearly what I did, and underestimate the change in the next 10 years. So I think we will have driverless cars. And the reason I said having a snooze is not to be completely sort of facetious, but of course, when we have driverless cars, they won't necessarily look like cars. They won't need to look like cars.
No.
So you could have a working office in your driverless car. You could have a bed in your driverless car. So I think there's a whole new world that's about to happen, and when it happens, it will happen quickly.
Yeah. I mean, in my area, we have the robots for shopping.
Oh, really?
So you pick up your app.
Where do you live? Mars?
Northampton, actually, not too far away. But like, you pick up your app on Tesco's, you pick what you want, then it will tell you it's on its way. It'll drive up to our driveway. Me and my daughter will go out. You unlock it with your phone, pick out your shopping. It'll sing you a little song, and then you close the lid and send it back on its way.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I said to my missus as well, like, it's just a few years. As soon as they say you can have driverless cars, then there'll be driverless shopping being delivered to you. You can literally walk out and get your Marks and Spencers or your Waitrose or your Asda.
Incredible.
Without having to.
Well, there you are.
Somewhere.
I mean, I agree. I think that, it is coming.
So that's what's next for technology. What's next for Paul Bainsfair? Do you have any personal or professional goals that you'd like to do?
Yes, I'd like to get my handicap into single figures. That's my goal. I'll try and do it while I'm still working.
Yeah.
And for those who don't play golf,
that
what are you talking about?
Well, I'm currently 13, and I'd like to be 9. It's only 4 shots. Please God, give me. Well, it's 5 shots, isn't it?
Yeah, 5 shots.
No, it's 4. 13 to 9. It's 4. Yeah, so that's my goal. No, I don't have any burning career ambitions anymore. Just carry on doing a good job at the IPA.
And personally, anything else you'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get to the age I'm at now, where you start thinking about retirement, you do start thinking about, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you have more time? And I think, funnily enough, I do still very much enjoy working. And I think the lockdown, the pandemic, gave us all a glimpse of what it's like to spend more time at home. So I'm putting off retirement as a result of that.
Were you thinking about it before the pandemic?
It was in the back of my mind.
Right.
But I think, I'm not ready not to work yet. But when I've got things I'm happy to spend more time doing when I'm able to do that. But not yet.
Not yet.
Well, it's been quite a journey. Ash, what would you say the main lessons from Paul Bainsfair's journey that our audience can learn from?
There's
or
many
some good ones.
Oh, some good ones. I'd say perseverance and continuing to do what you love, to not be afraid to make mistakes, and to embrace the next stages that you're able to attain in your career.
Great. I'm happy with that. Thanks, mate.
I think there's something you've done in your career, which we've done as well, which just does take a lot of courage, which is taking that leap into the complete unknown of starting your own company. Because there is no career ladder, there is no security, there is no safety net or organization behind backing you. It's you on your own in some ways, even if you.
Yeah, and I think it's a young state of mind to do it as well, because I talk about golf again briefly, but I was talking to an old guy who had been a golf professional, playing golf with him, and I said, "Tell me something which I've always wanted to know the answer to this. Why do golfers stop winning at a high level when they get into their 40s?" Which they do. But I mean, you've got exceptions like Woods and so on, but essentially they stop winning. Now, there's no golf is not football. There's no physical deterioration that happens when you're 40. You hit the ball just as far. And in fact, you'd think that the culmination of your experience would make you a better player. But by and large, they stop winning. Why is that? And he said to me, well, I know exactly why that is. He said, when I was younger, I was a good golfer, obviously, turned professional. I could make the ball move right or left. I knew my yardages. I knew how far I could hit the ball. I was a good putter. Every time I went out, I thought I was going to win, because I knew how good I was. And sometimes I did win, and sometimes I didn't win. But every time I went out, I thought, I'm going to win. And then something happens to you when you're about that age, say 40. You go out, it's the same day, you read the wind, you know how long the hole is, you know what you're going to do, you need to move slightly right to left, and you can see the shot in your mind, and you know where it's going to finish. But suddenly you think, but it might not. It just might not, because I know from previous experience it doesn't always end up there. And you start to think, you start to doubt, or think about all the things that can go on, that do go on, that might interfere with you. He said, and the minute you start thinking like that, you can't win. You've got to think you're going to win. And I think the reason I'm telling that story is because when I did start the agency, even though we had a rocky 3 months when we started winning it, I was just convinced we were going to succeed. So the sort of leap into the night that we took and all the rest of it that we talked about, it was, looking back, I think, how did I do that? But at the time, it didn't seem like that. It just felt, well, of course we're going to succeed, because we were young and we were confident and we believed in ourselves. And I think that, is one of the advantages of being young and brave. And as you get older and wiser, you realize that bravery is not all it's cracked up to be, so you start to step back a bit. So I think that's a big learning thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got it in you, do it when you're young, because when you get older, you probably won't.
I think there are exceptions to the rule. Definitely, there'll be great. There are great examples of people in their 50s, 60s starting great businesses.
Yeah,
but there's a definite. It's talking about pros and cons. There's a great pro in the naivety at your young age to be, we can do it.
Yeah, of course we'll succeed.
And what's your final words of wisdom for people listening who'd like to reach, CEO, boss level? If
you're pretty, well equipped, I would give the same answer to someone who asked me recently, like, I don't think I'll ever get a job in advertising. Some young guy was saying, I'm desperate to get a job in advertising. It seems so difficult. I said, if you want it, you will get it, And I think that if you want to be a CEO, you really, really want it, and you don't waver from that, you can get it. Now, it might not be the biggest company in the world. It might be, if it's all about being a CEO, there are lots of CEO jobs, But if you want to do something, there's no one stopping you but yourself. You just get out there and do it.
Mm.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good. Are we done?
We're done.
I feel like I've been in analysis. That was an epic.